my name is Emily Greenwood, and I am here today to introduce the argument of whether or not schools should require uniforms for their students. I strongly believe that schools should not require uniforms for their students. There are many pros and cons to both sides of this argument. However, I believe that the pros of this side of the argument outweigh the cons and pros of the other side. Okay, first off, I'm going to explain some of the pros of schools not enforcing uniforms, or as you all will see, the cons of schools enforcing uniforms. The first pro I will be explaining is students express themselves through their clothing. As stated by Maria Okades on theclassroom.com, however, the major disadvantage with adopting high school dress codes is that it keeps students from being able to express their individuality through their attire. Clothes are an expression of a person's style and taste, and teenagers are particularly drawn towards establishing their individual identities. Therefore, it can be argued that in prescribing uniforms and prohibiting students from wearing what they would like, schools are stifling their freedom of expression. I firmly believe that uniforms prevent students from expressing themselves in creative and unique ways that show who they are as a person. Studies show that school uniforms, whether it is elementary, middle, or high school, stunt students' growth in their individuality as a person. Allowing students to wear what they want to wear, at least within reason, gives them the freedom and opportunity to show who they are as a person, makes them better able to figure out who they want to be and how they want to be seen as a person, and studies even show that letting students wear what they want to wear promotes the development of confidence in themselves due to them being more comfortable and at home with what they were wearing. When discussing the merits of school uniforms, we could even go as far as to say that uniforms take away students' First Amendment right. Procon.org states, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees that all individuals have the right to express themselves freely. Uniforms, as we all know, do not allow students to express themselves freely through their clothing. This statement pushes the question of whether or not students leave amendment rights at the door to their schools and no longer have those same rights when in school as they have when outside of school. I, for one, as well as many others, believe that students, no matter if they are inside or outside of school, should have access to their amendment rights as people, because when we start taking away basic human rights away from people based on age, circumstances, or location, then everything starts falling apart. Students have a right, as humans, as people, to dress and express themselves freely through their clothing. Another one of my pros in this debate is that uniforms are universally very expensive for both schools and parents of the students. If schools are paying for these uniforms, then where is the money coming from? Are schools able to afford them all for all of their students? Are they cutting other programs and extracurriculars in order to afford these uniforms? Are they taking away opportunities for students to branch out, try new things, and broaden their educational experience due to not having enough money to afford and sustain them due to the cost of uniforms? These are all questions we must ask ourselves when taking a side in this debate. Maria Okades states on theclassroom.com, there is also the issue of costs. Since parents also have to purchase multiple sets of clothing for home and school use, and that may in some cases be too expensive for parents with low socioeconomic status or multiple children. If schools aren't going to pay for the uniforms, then parents have to. Not every parent can afford school uniforms, in fact, most can't. The average cost of a single school uniform in the United States is anywhere from $100 to $500, and logically, in order to not have to wash and reuse the same uniform every single day of the week, more than one uniform is needed. ConnectUsFund.org says, although we pointed out earlier that school uniforms are more economical compared to buying a school wardrobe, critics argue that it can be costly to buy several uniforms at once. Also, there are many other types of uniforms parents are required to buy aside from the everyday uniform. There are also PE uniforms and formal uniforms. With the amount of uniforms that need to be bought and the abundant cost of them, it is hard on any parent, even those that are well off financially. But for those parents who cannot afford these costly uniforms, it can be devastating. It can cause them to have to pull their child out of school, go without needed items in order to afford them, and it could even cause the parents to have to take out a small loan for them. Uniforms are just an added financial burden that is not wanted or needed. Yet another pro of my chosen side of this debate is that uniforms have been proven to increase school violence, acting out, and bullying. One of the main reasons schools start enforcing school uniforms is so that the differences in clothing and class status are less apparent, and therefore it hopefully causes a lessening in bullying and other violent acts between students. But the statistics from various studies do not support that. COMM-2025 states, a peer-reviewed study found that school uniforms increased the average number of assaults by about 14 per year in the most violent schools. A Texas Southern University study found that school discipline incidents rose by about 12% after the introduction of uniforms. According to the Miami-Dade County Public Schools Office of Education Evaluation and Management, fights in middle school nearly doubled within 1 year of introducing mandatory uniforms. This study is also explained by Amy Morin on verywellfamily.com. This is the exact opposite of what is intended with school uniforms when they are first introduced. Also, many people believe that school uniforms decrease discipline issues, but that is not the case here. Uniforms do not decrease disciplinary issues in students. As I said previously, uniforms take away students' ability to express themselves. Without that freedom of expression, there's no way for them to get their anger, frustration, or other strong feelings out of the way, so therefore, due to this, there is an increase in disciplinary issues in students. This is another way that uniforms fail to do what they are intended to do. The last pro on my side of this debate that I'm going to talk about is how uniforms increases the possibility of someone considering them sexist and how it infringes on the LGBTQ debate. Amelia Josephson on smartasset.com states, some uniforms may strike students and parents as sexist. For example, if a uniform requires girls to wear skirts and pants are not allowed, some students and parents may object, leading to a conflict with the school administration. Not all girls want to wear skirts, and some may resent being told to wear traditionally feminine garments. Also, if a student is unsure of their place on the gender spectrum or is experimenting with different forms of gender presentation, school uniforms can present a real challenge. The standard uniform attire is typically different for boys than it is for girls. Girls typically have to wear skirts as well as other items that differ from the uniform boys have to wear. Complaints of sexism are very easily found in schools where uniforms are enforced. Touching on the LGBTQ debate, students who are experiencing gender identity issues or who might identify as a gender that varies from their birth gender might see uniforms as offensive and might interfere with those students' mental and physical health. In order to bypass these issues, uniforms cannot be enforced. This is a very heavily debated topic as well, and despite differences of opinion on LGBTQ matters, most people can agree that mental health matters, and in order to preserve students' mental health on the subject, it is best to not cause further issues by enforcing school uniforms. Okay? Now that I have explained some of the pros on my chosen side of the argument, I'm now going to provide some rebuttals of the argument that favors the side of how schools should enforce uniforms, and I'm going to explain how these rebuttals are not logical. Many people who are for schools enforcing uniforms believe that they reduce socioeconomic divisions. While this is an issue that does need to be improved on, enforcing uniforms does not help in any way. ProComm.org states, most public schools with uniform policies are in poor neighborhoods, emphasizing the class distinctions that uniforms were supposed to eliminate. In the quote that I have provided, it clearly says that uniforms did not in fact reduce socioeconomic divisions, that uniforms actually increased it. Uniforms made socioeconomic divisions worse. Another reason people are for schools enforcing uniforms is that they believe uniforms prevent the use of gang colors and symbols. While it is true that uniforms prevent the use of gang colors and symbols while students are in school, it does nothing to prevent them outside of schools. Also, the enforcement of uniforms can make it to where no information can be gained from those students. By allowing students to wear what they want to wear, it allows students to see who might potentially be in gang-related activity and get help for those individuals, as well as monitor those students to make sure nothing gets out of hand. Uniforms prevent valuable information from being gained about the students that could potentially harm them in the long run. Maria Okada states on theclassroom.com, when students wear their own choice of clothing, teachers, administrators, and law enforcement will be able to monitor gang membership more closely because gang members often wear particular affiliated symbols or colors. Parents and school officials often argue that uniforms put the brakes on gangs by removing this subtle communication method. However, uniforms do not eliminate gangs, and in fact, standard issue clothing can potentially make symbolic gang clothing more difficult to identify or interpret, reinforcing a false sense of safety. Uniforms, once again, doesn't actually do what they're supposedly supposed to do. Yet another reason people are for schools enforcing uniforms is that it is said that uniforms are easier to enforce than dress codes. Marian Wild states on greatschools.org, uniforms are certainly easier for an administration to enforce than dress codes. While it may seem like this is a logical conclusion, both uniforms and dress codes provide the same sort of challenges. Uniforms seem like a good thing to do due to this reason, but they are not a good thing. The results of which one, either uniforms or dress codes, is easier to enforce show them to be equal. Therefore, can we really say that this is a good reason for enforcing uniforms? I surely don't think so. Okay. Now that I've explained the pros and rebuttals of the current argument, I'm going to list some interesting facts about the subject. School uniforms originated in England. 20% of schools in the United States enforce uniforms. More primary schools enforce uniforms than middle and high schools. Rural schools are less likely to enforce uniform policies. And uniforms are more common in private schools than public schools. Now that I've listed some interesting facts on the subject, I'm going to bring us back to the main argument at hand. The pros of schools not enforcing uniforms outweigh the cons in opposing arguments. I've provided many strong points that support my point of view on the matter, and I truly hope that these points have given you all a good, solid foundation to base your choice in this argument on. While school uniforms can provide some positive impacts, I strongly believe that it is necessary for students to be able to express their creative freedom with their clothing. I believe that the pros of schools not enforcing uniforms outweigh any argument you can make that pushes for schools to enforce uniforms. I want to say thank you for listening to my presentation on the argument of whether schools should or should not enforce uniforms, and I hope that my stance on the argument truly makes you think about the subject. I am firm with my belief, and all of my points are backed up with facts proven by research and data. Bye everyone!